bulk reviewer demo Q&A. I think we've admitted everybody who's been waiting, and we will go ahead and get started. If you would like to ask a question or share your experiences with Bulk Reviewer, please do so in the anonymous form in the chat. We will also have time for questions at the end of the presentation. Our presenter today is Tessa Walsh. Tessa is a digital preservationist based in Montreal and a software developer at Artifactual Systems. Prior to joining Artifactual, Tessa developed and implemented digital preservation programs as a digital preservation librarian at Concordia University and digital archivist at the Canadian Centre for Architecture. She is the recipient of a 2019 NDSA Individual Innovation Award and was a 2018 Summer Fellow at the Library Innovation Hub at Harvard University. Tessa is the maintainer of several free and open source software projects that support digital preservation and curation activities, including Brunhilde, Bulk Reviewer, and Metz Flask. So thank you everyone again for joining us. And I think Tessa, if you are ready, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Nice to be here with everybody today. Forgive me if I'm a little sniffly. I've got seasonal allergies, even though we had our first snow in Montreal today, and I'm not quite emotionally ready for that yet. I'm going to start off with a brief presentation, just to sort of contextualize Bulk Reviewer for you, and then we'll move into a demo, and I'll give some kind of final thoughts before the Q&A on future directions and possible development directions. Yeah, if you have questions, please put them in the anonymous form in the chat. And I look forward to hearing the questions that you have. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and let's just jump in. Okay. Are you seeing my desktop? The browser
Yes.
open? Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you might want to exit or go into full slide view.
Yeah. Let's see if we can. Can you see that the slide as full screen now, or is it still showing the desktop? Yeah, great.
Yep, you're good. Thanks.
Okay. So as you know, I'm Tessa. For my day job, I work at Artifactual Systems as a software developer, where I mostly work on Archivematica and Atom, but sometimes on other projects related to kind of client needs and the open source projects. And as was mentioned in the introduction, I also maintain a number of kind of free and open source software programs, utilities, including Bulk Reviewer. So today I'm going to talk about this one. Just to be clear, this is basically just a solo project, and I'll get into where some of the funding and support for it has come from. But this isn't something that I'm doing as part of my day job. It's very much like a individual contributor open source kind of project. So the idea for Bulk Reviewer developed out of conversations at the 2017 Bitcurator Users Forum, which is a wonderful conference if you haven't been, where digital curation professionals in the room talked a bit about needing to move from simply using forensics tools to identify potential private and sensitive information in digital archives, to actively managing, evaluating, and somehow acting on that information. These aren't new ideas, but there remained a gap at that time, and I think there still remains a gap between archivist need and available tools. So Ben Goldman and Timothy Pyatt's 2013 article, Security Without Obscurity, Managing Personally Identifiable Information in Born Digital Archives, does a really good job of explaining this experience that a lot of archivists have, by talking about the experience of archivists at Stanford University struggling to apply forensic software to the problem of private and sensitive information in the Stop AIDS project records. And kind of similar issues around sensitive content in email have led to a number of papers and the development of tools such as EPAD, the RATOM toolset, and TOMES. So clearly this like issue of private and sensitive information um, has been on the horizon for a little while, and parts of it have been worked on quite a lot. But there still remains this problem, I think, in the day-to-day working lives of a lot of archivists. So in the summer of 2018, I received a summer fellowship at the Library Innovation Lab at Harvard Law School to work on a prototype of what was eventually to become Bulk Reviewer, with the intention of developing a software tool that would assist archivists and other information professionals in managing this problem to a greater degree than was currently possible. I decided to leverage the open source bulk extractor engine developed by Simpson Garfinkel for identifying personally identifiable information, or PII, based on regular expression matches, and kind of build from there. And that was in part because this is, a standard tool set in a lot of archivists' wheelhouse already. It's already part of the BitCurator environment. And in part because it's just an incredibly effective tool that is also sort of open source. And so seemed like a good tool for the job. The following winter, with the generous help of a Concordia University Library Research Grant, where I was a digital preservation librarian at the time, I rewrote the kind of server-based prototype that I developed during the fellowship as a desktop application. So it would be easier for archivists to install and use. Targeting specifically Linux and Mac, and I added support as well for identifying Canadian social insurance numbers, which was something that in a Canadian context, Bulk Extractor hadn't been doing yet. So the first proper version of Bulk Reviewer that someone could download and use, version 0.1.0, was released in May 2019, and I've continued working on it since. It's an actively maintained and developed application, and the latest 0.3 version was released just a few months ago in this September. And shout out to Shelley Black, who is one of the organizers for this call, on doing some user testing for that release. That was very helpful. So in short, the purpose of Bulk Reviewer is to provide a tool set for reviewing potential personally identifiable information, which I'll just probably call PII moving forward. In the terminology of Bulk Extractor, these things are called features. So that's another term you might hear me use. Features being like potential PII or other information of note within digital files. So the purpose is to provide a tool set for reviewing PII, making annotations, reporting on results, and exporting sets of files for either public dissemination or further action like redaction. Originally, it's sort of aimed at building a tool that could do sort of redaction itself for various file formats. And I think there might still be room to develop in that direction in the future. I'll probably talk about that more towards the end of this presentation. But there's also all sorts of issues there, namely that this is something that, to be able to deploy in production, you want to have very, very high confidence for, which means it's quite a difficult development task to do and do reliably in a way that people could count on, especially when the stakes are high, as they often are for private and sensitive information. Technically, Bulk Reviewer is an Electron desktop application. So it's essentially a web application that runs in a local version of Chromium on your desktop, which includes an executable version of a Python program that provides most of the application's backend functionality. This makes the application portable between Linux and Mac, with Windows support being eyed for a future release. Bulk Reviewer depends on some system dependencies, such as Bulk Extractor and the Sleuth Kit, but it comes with installation scripts to help install these dependencies as needed. And in environments like BitCurator, where these dependencies are already installed, the application will work out of the box. You can just download the app image file from the GitHub repository under the Releases tab, and open it up in BitCurator, and it should just run. Bulk Reviewer is designed to work with directories and disk images as sources, And as of the 0.2 release, it'll also work in conjunction with existing bulk extractor feature files. So we'll get into that in the demo a little bit. I think this is important. Bulk Reviewer is not intended to be a full solution to the difficult and contextual problem of managing private and sensitive information. And I don't want to try to sell it as such. But instead, it's just a tool in an archivist toolbox that helps them in approaching the problem, and one with them designed in mind as an end user. So one of the issues we see when we're using forensic applications that were developed essentially for law enforcement um, is that their use cases don't often match ours. So for example, bulk extractor, if you read the original paper that Simpson published, um, the credit card scanner, for example, is illustrated in a use case as being a quick way to say if you have a hard drive of evidence and you suspect that people might be up to credit card fraud, you can run this as a first triage kind of tool. And if there are things that look like credit card numbers, then you have enough to maybe like hold somebody. Um, but that's not really what we're trying to do as archivists. It's not really enough to know that the information might be there somewhere. We need to know exactly where it is. We need to check if it's actually PII because this is often such a contextual issue. Um, and presumably we want to actually be able to do something about that then, or like review file by file, for instance. So the idea of bulk reviewer is to basically help with these activities. After initiating a scan from within the application or uploading existing bulk extractor feature files, the user can review the potential PII found by bulk extractor by feature type or by file, review results, dismiss false positives, make notes and annotations, generate reports, and ultimately create file exports containing either files that have been reviewed and found fit to be, for dissemination, or those with confirmed PII that require some additional kind of follow-up. So I'm going to, at this point, switch over to doing a demo. If I can get out of this screen, there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna be doing this demo on my Mac, where I've installed Bulk Reviewer by downloading the DMG installer from GitHub and running the install Mac shell script that's included with the application that does some things like installing the sleuth kit and bulk extractor for you. Really just for convenience, but we could do the same thing in Ubuntu, in Bitcurator, and eventually someday in Windows. And again, we can get back to what some of the blockers for that are at the moment. So this is what Bulk Reviewer looks like when you load it, and it gives you two basic options right from the bat. You can either scan a new directory or disk image, or you can load an existing session. This is the first time that we've run anything, so we're gonna do new. Let me see if I can get this window out of my way a little bit. There we go. So new session, the main thing that you have to do is give it a source, either a directory or a disk image, and a name. So we'll do a directory first. I'm gonna click browse here, go to my desktop, and I have a test data directory here. It basically has a handful of files that have some fake PII, as well as like a copy of my CV and a copy of my bio that we're going to use to demonstrate regular expression matching in a little bit, as well as some kind of innocuous files. So I have like some pictures, some JPEGs from a cabin I stayed in where there's nothing private or sensitive there, at least not in the context of what we're looking for here. So we're going to select this directory and we're going to call it SAA demo. You notice there's an expandable options menu here. One thing we'll come back to is this use existing bulk extractor reports option. Otherwise, these are basically options that you have as command line flags in bulk extractor for the most part, just presented in a graphical interface. So there's a setting for what kind of pattern matching to do for social security numbers. The default one is medium, which is it expects digits that match 3, then 2, then 4 with dashes in the middle. Bulk extractor also has a strict mode, mode 0, where there has to be a label SSN at the front, or a lenient number, which will just match any number of 9, any combination of 9 digits, which, as you could expect, returns a lot of false positives, but also has greater coverage. So you're not going to miss anything. You might just get a whole lot of things that aren't social security numbers either. There's an option to upload a regular expressions file. Again, we'll do that in a little bit, as well as a stop list. So you can specify essentially words that bulk extractor shouldn't look for here. There's 2 additional options at the bottom that just impact how the results are displayed. So by default, bulk extractor grabs a lot of information like domain names and URLs, email headers, HTTP logs, that we often wouldn't think of as sensitive, but you might be interested in given a particular use case. So if you were looking for a particular kind of domain, or for example, if you have like a hard drive where there's a lot of personal activity and you want to identify where maybe some files that have to do with like web browsing or emails are, you could click on this and all these results will show up. Otherwise, they're kind of hidden by default because they can typically kind of be seen as noise. Similarly, with the EXIF metadata, so bulk extractor and bulk reviewer are going to look for things like geotags, and if they find them, that will be displayed. But it doesn't by default display like the full EXIF metadata for images because some of that can be just kind of benign. So again, by default, that doesn't show, but there's an option to make it. So we're going to hit Start Scan, just with the default options. And you'll see you get kind of like a spinning icon. If you're scanning a very large directory or disk image, this can take a long time. In a future version, I would love to have a better kind of user experience here around the feedback of what's happening. One thing to note though, in your home directory, the first time that you run bulk extractor, bulk reviewer, it's going to create a directory called bulk reviewer. So this is in my Tessa home directory. And if we go into there, that's where it's going to put a handful of things. So one is there's a bulk reviewer log. We can open this file and basically see in real time what it's doing. This log also persists afterwards. So if there are errors reading any of the feature files or any of the lines from the feature files that bulk extractor creates, for example, you can go back and look at this log and it'll point out what those errors were. In this case, we see it created a Json file. We'll get back to that soon, and it's complete. So we're all good, and I don't see any errors here. In that home directory, every time you create a scan, it's also going to create a copy here of the bulk extractor reports, which it leaves there so that you can just manually go through them if you'd like, or run some other kind of computational process on them, as well as a Json file. And this is basically just how bulk reviewer stores its data locally. If we open this up, this Json file has the name that we gave the scan, the source path to the source, an indication of whether it's a disk image, whether a regex file was used, for example, and then it has a list of all of the files in the source with things like their file name, modified date. If it's a disk image, you'll have a lot of information here about, for example, whether it's an allocated file, as well as some internal things that bulk reviewer keeps track of, as well as a list of all the features. So basically, under this fancy interface, there's just a human readable, machine processable JSON file that you could go do other things with. And this is the format if you save your session as well. It just gets saved as a JSON file like this. Looking in the interface, though, our scan was successful. So here is what here's like what it looks like. The main kind of interface is what I call the review dashboard. It's essentially a table here that has a drop list of all of the different potential types of information that were found. So we'll see here there were about 4,000 social security numbers, 16 phone numbers, an email address, And my guess would be some of these things like EXIF metadata and the HTTP log and all of that would be populated, except we had selected in the options to hide that. In addition to this table, there's a file selector here. So this allows you to filter the feature table, the review dashboard, by just an individual file. So for example, we see, okay, well, basically almost all of our features were in this fake SSN file. So if we click that, it filters the table below to only the results from that individual file. And you also get an option here where you can click open and it will open the file for you directly in whatever the default application is in your desktop for opening that kind of file. So that can be useful if you want to just give it a quick check outside of just the information available here, for example, to verify whether it's real or not. There's a number of things you can do in this table. One is there's an expandable menu here to show additional details. You can also do this individually for each item. Sorry, my printer's decided to clean itself. Good timing. Within each one of these, you see there's also an option to open the file. You see the feature, the actual match that was found, displayed with a little bit of context, and it's sort of subtly highlighted so you can see where it is, as well as the forensic path, which is what Bulk Extractor internally uses as an identifier for where to find this feature. So it tends to be the path to the file, and then this little icon, and then an offset, so how many bytes into the file this feature can be found. And that looks a little bit different in a disk image. For each one of these, we can also add a note. So say we are looking at this file, we're like, okay, these look like social security numbers, but literally the file name is fake SSN. And if we open it up, there's a note saying, as of July 1st, 2011, these social security numbers could not have been issued by the Social Security Administration, are therefore fake. So we can say fairly confidently that these are actually all false positives and they're noise. And here's how we can deal with that. One thing that we can do, which might be more useful when there's a smaller number of files, is we can add a note saying reviewed, not real, something like that. So that as we're going through our files and when we come back to this one, we know that it wasn't real. But we can also dismiss it. And this is basically a Boolean like yes, no kind of status within Bulk Reviewer. If you dismiss a feature, from there on out, it's going to treat that as if it was not PII. And we have the ability to apply that individually for a single file. Or, for example, we can do all of the features in the current table, which is going to be in this fake SSN file. And we can see the feature count updates, right? All of a sudden it's showing us no social security numbers. So if we go back to looking at all of our files, now we're looking at 113 features, which seems more reasonable. So you can keep doing this, basically walking down file by file. There's a little indicator here. If you want to say, for example, okay, fake SSN, I've looked at, I don't need to come back to that later. You can use this indicator as a reminder to yourself to do that. So next we'll go to this loans document. We'll say, okay, again, these kind of look like they might be social security numbers. Let's take a look at the file. It'll take a second because it's going to open it up probably in Excel, whatever I have set here. You see it's a list of names. These are not real, by the way. This is test data. But we see a list of names with social security numbers, financial information. So these very much are real. So we're not going to dismiss these. We'll keep that as it is. We can say we've seen that one, and we can keep basically walking down and making annotations. The other thing that you can do, if you don't want to look file by file, is just going in the feature tab. We can say, okay, where were the phone numbers? And it's going to tell us for each one what file it was in, So it looks like these were all in that loans file, which we determined were real PII. And if we go to address, looks like there was an email address in my full CV. So if you're looking to contact me at Artifactual, that's my Artifactual email address. So looking at this, say we've done a review, and we're saying, okay, like this seems not harmful public email address. That looks fine, so we'll dismiss that one. Now, say it's time for a lunch break, or we're calling it quits for the day, and we want to save our progress. There's a save button here. It will let you save your in progress work. So we'll call it essay demo in progress. That was saved, and if we go to our desktop, now we see that. And if we sort of close out of the application and come back to it later, sorry, the zoom menu keeps getting in my way. We can load our progress from that JSON file that we had saved. And everything's still like as it was, right? If we go to email addresses, there's only one dismissed thing that has our annotation. All those fake social security numbers have been dismissed. So we actually have a much smaller number of files and features that are genuine PII. So at this point, we can do a couple things. You can download a CSV report. Archivists, myself included, love documenting things. So this might be useful for a couple different ways. One might be actually that it's just easier for you to work with this information in a spreadsheet, or it might be that you want to document, for example, which PII was found and which files were removed, something like that. Either way, we can say yeah, .csv, that's fine. And if we go to our desktop, we have this CSV file that basically contains all the same information from the dashboard. So for each feature, we have the type, the forensic path to where it was in the file. We have the actual feature itself, whatever context was there, as well as its dismissed status, which is, remember, if we dismissed all these fake social security numbers in bulk reviewer because we said, like, they're not real. The final kind of actionable things that you can do here are to actually do some kind of exports. One version for this is just a straightforward file export. So if we go to export files here, it gives you two options. One is cleared and private. Cleared is any files that do not have kind of confirmed PII in them. So it's stuff that either bulk extractor didn't find any features in that file, or all the features that it found you dismissed as false positives. So let's choose a destination for that. We'll put it on our desktop, and we'll call it test cleared. And it's going to export. As you can imagine, we're working with a small amount of data here, so it's pretty speedy. It might be slower if you have a larger data set. And if we go to our test cleared directory, there's a README file here that has some information about the export, when it happened, the source it was from, as well as a list of the files that were excluded for containing PII. So here we have our department CSV, a tax return file, and that loans Excel document, as well as a copy of all of the original files that didn't have PII in them, with the same file paths and everything preserved. It's just the files that did have PII that are removed. So this might be useful, for example, if you're doing a check for PII before giving access to data to a researcher in a reading room, or before emailing files to somebody, you could do a cleared export here and have reasonable confidence that you've done a good faith pass to find the stuff that can be found with regular expressions. Another option here is to do a private export. So this will be only the files that actually do contain PII. So we're going to choose our destination. Again, let's go to our desktop, and we'll call this test private. file export in progress, and then it's done. If we go there, we see a similar README file with a little bit of information about what type of export this was and when it happened, and as well as just a list, like basically just our files. If these all happen to be at the top level of our test data directory, if these were in directories or subdirectories, those would also be replicated here. There is an option to export files to a flat directory just for the private files, and we can see what that looks like. In this case, it's not going to be hugely different because there weren't subdirectories to begin with. But you can see there is a bit of a change. So in this case, if you do the kind of flat export, instead of recreating all the directories that the files were in, it's going to just dump them into a single flat directory, and it's going to prepend its internal file ID to each one, just as a way of making sure there aren't any name collisions if there were two identically named files in different places in the source. But this might be useful, for example, if you are exporting just a handful of files that you want to redact. Say you have PDFs and you want to run them through Adobe Acrobat to do the redaction because that's kind of like best-in-class software for that. This might be a way of doing that more manageably than just kind of dumping out a whole bunch of files like in their original subdirectories. So you could get a single kind of list of the files that you can sort and go through, and you could use that in tandem with the CSV export if you wanted to be able to like individually go into each one and search for the features that it has. The kind of final export option here is to download a tar exclude file. So we can download that to my desktop and take a look at it. Great. And this is basically a list of each of the files that have PAI formatted in a way where you could pass this to the tar command to create like a tarred output directory from your source that only that doesn't include any of the files that you found in Bulk Reviewer have PII. So this was something requested by Brian Dietz at North Carolina State University, and that presumably him and Shelley are using in their workflows there. But I think you could see that the general kind of application. It's another way of basically getting a file list of files that you don't want to copy from place to place. So that's the basic functionality. I wanted to show you a few extra things. So one is we're going to do a regex test. On my desktop, I have a file called sample regex, and I put two regular expressions each on their own line here. These are very easy to understand regular expressions because they don't have any of the kind of complicated pattern matching syntax that regular expressions usually have. We just have the words artifactual and concordia. And because I worked and continue to work, I worked at Concordia and continue to work at Artifactual, these are going to show up in my bio and CV. So this will be a way I can just show you what it looks like if you run Bulk Reviewer with the option for a custom regular expression. So we're going to run it against the same test data. And this time we're going to go to regular expressions file and upload our file. The way this all works is also documented in Bulk Extractor. We're just putting a sort of graphical interface on top of it. For example, how to format that regex file. So we're going to click Start Scan. It'll take a minute. You can see the regular expressions. Basically, the more that you add, the longer it's going to take because it's going to look for these patterns in addition to all the other patterns it's already looking for each of the files in the source directory. So it can take a minute. Actually, while it's doing that, maybe I can go to kind of the future direction stuff and then come back to show you this and the last thing that I wanted to show you, which is using existing bulk extractor feature files. Oh, and it just finished. Never mind. So we can see we get basically the same results that we had before, but in addition to our other results, we have user-supplied regular expressions. We have some matches. And you can see, as expected, it found the words artifactual and Concordia in both my bio and my CV. So those would now, unless I marked them as dismissed here, those would be considered PII. So regular expressions allow you to build very powerful pattern matches. So if you're looking for something context specific, for example, if you know that there's a regular pattern that like student ID numbers have in your institution, or you're looking for a sort of national identifier that's not one that bulk extractor natively supports, or something like that, you could write a regular expression and pass it to bulk reviewer to basically look for any kind of string that you want to. So finally, I want to show you what it looks like if we use existing bulk extractor reports. So on my desktop, I have a sample disk image here that is from some BitCurator related sample data I've been working with for a long time. And I also have a directory called existing feature files. Basically, I just already ran bulk reviewer. Oh my god, bulk extractor. Sorry, even I get confused by the names. I already ran bulk extractor on this disk image, and these were the outputs that it gave me. And now I want to look at them in bulk reviewer. So what we're going to do is type disk image. You have to point it to the directory or disk image that the reports are from. And ideally, this should be at the same file path that it was when bulk extractor was originally scanned. Because the application is going to need that file path to be the same in order to do things like file exports. It's a bit. I'm not thrilled with how that requirement at the moment. So that might be something that changes in a future release, and I'd be happy to hear user feedback on how big of a limitation that is. But for now, that's kind of true. So we're going to say disk image, existing feature files, just give it a name. And we're going to go here to use existing bulk extractor reports and select our directory that has them. And the other options are going to be ignored because we're passing our own reports in. And now you can see within the disk image, there were some features in some of the files in the disk image, email addresses in this loveletter.virus, for example, and in docs law. You can also see, because bulk extractor scans byte by byte, there were a number of features that were found not in individual files in the disk image, but actually in unallocated space. So these might be things in kind of like swap space or deleted files or other things that wouldn't show if you just plugged if you just like mounted this disk image on your computer or plugged the floppy disk or whatever it was imaged from but are nonetheless on the disk. So that's one benefit of forensics tools, but that's basically just bulk extractor doing the lifting under the hood. And you can see when there are types of PII or features that aren't in the kind of list the bulk reviewer is natively looking for, it, instead of giving a nice kind of name like credit card number, it just gives the name of the feature file that it was found in here. I think for now that's it for the demo. So let's go back to the slides for just a second, and then we can open it up for questions. Yeah, so moving forward. So like I said, this is an actively maintained project. At the current, I have no funding for it. It's something I do nights and weekends. From a long-term perspective, it would be great to solidify that support a little bit so it's not relying on a single individual contributor working for free after hours. But I also like working on open source projects, so it's not a problem for the moment. So there's some maintenance tasks that are just ongoing that are on my radar. One is that Bulk Extractor is working towards a 2.0 release at the moment, that intends to make it more of a like kind of production worthy application and less of like a first triage type tool. Um, so in case there are any kind of breaking changes that come from that, I am kind of committing to making sure that there's compatibility with Bulk Extractor regardless of what version you're using after the new version releases. I also do regular upgrades of Electron, Chromium, and a lot of the other dependencies. Anyone here who's done any kind of front-end web development in recent years can attest to how quickly the JavaScript ecosystem changes and how many security vulnerabilities there are. So in order to stay on top of that, those are mitigated somewhat by the fact that this is running as a desktop app and not on a web server. But still, I do regular upgrades of these. So I recently moved, for example, to a new Electron version because the one that it was using previously was falling out of support. And those are things that I'll just continue to do. There's also some possible future directions that I would love to work on, and essentially just am not at the moment because of funding and time. Namely, that I have a day job, so without someone wanting to work with me as a partner, finding funding for the work, it's hard to do the amount of work to do like substantial new feature development. One of these things, I think there's a lot of opportunity for natural language processing, especially like named entity recognition, using, for example, Spacey. This would be something similar to what the Ratom toolkit and EPAD do for email. And there's some like low-level, low-hanging fruit things like, extracting personal names that could be quite easy to implement, actually. The more difficult thing is figuring out how to package some of these libraries so that they work in the desktop application across different platforms, as well as kind of what to do with all the data. Like, I have a development branch where I've been doing some name entity recognition, and you get a lot of hits, including a lot of noise. So I think there's a question about like what would need to be done in the review dashboard to be able to like help you cut through the noise if we started adding a bunch of these extra feature types. One thing that's been on my radar for a while that I would love is to do a pre-scan kind of OCR and text extraction from images and PDFs before running Bulk Extractor. So right now, Bulk Extractor is basically looking for text, but if you have, say, like, I don't know, a form that has a social security number on it, but it's an image of that form that someone took with their phone that doesn't have any OCR, Bulk Extractor is not going to be able to find that text. So ideally, what we would want to do is maybe use something like Apache Tika, like OCR, like Tesseract, and text extraction like Apache Tika to get all the text out of files that don't already have text, and then run Bulk Extractor against that, just to be able to pick up and have a higher confidence in our results. Windows support is definitely in the possible future directions. That's not a huge obstacle. Electron will support that. Bulk Reviewer is already in Windows, but there's some. I would say it's probably like a small to medium sized project with certain ways that the backend code works that would need to be rewritten to not assume that it's on a Linux-like system. As well as new scanners. So there's actually an issue in the repository about this. It would be great to have bank account scanners, scanners for health information, other national IDs. And there's some really great lists out there with regular expressions that could be added to this. But it's probably a two-step process of adding them to Bulk Extractor first, like I did with the social insurance number, and then adding support into the application. So it's just a bit of work. And finally, kind of in-file redaction for select formats. So maybe if there's certain formats, one of the things that's I think powerful about Bulk Reviewer, but also limiting, is it's intended for heterogeneous data. So it's not just looking at email or just images or just Word documents. It's kind of supposed to look across everything, which makes it hard to support formats for something like redaction because every format is so different, and every software program, if we're being honest, kind of tends to implement the specs for file formats a little differently. But it might be possible to, example, start with PDF or start with like JPEG images or something and slowly sort of build support over time. And that's something that I would love to do. But basically, I'm looking for either partners, funding, direction, demonstrated use cases. So if any of that sort of resonates with you and is something that you'd be interested in potentially looking at moving forward, please just get in touch. I'm not hard to find. Um, I wanted to point out very quickly, and then we can go into questions. This is my contact information. Please do get in touch anytime. The code for Bulk Reviewer is on GitHub. It has its own organization. All the development branches are here. What you see here is basically exactly what you're running. There's no private fork or anything like that. It's all licensed with the GPL license, so it's a copyleft open source project. And there's also documentation, and this is linked to from the GitHub repository already. But there's a documentation site that, for example, has details on exactly how to install the application, recommended hardware specs, as well as, for example, if you're like, say, scanning a new directory. If you, like me, kind of forgot what a stop list is for a minute, you can come here and say, oh, okay, it's going to exclude known acceptable features. And there's a link to the bulk extractor user manual that tells you how that works and everything. So with that, I will stop talking for now and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Tessa. This was a really great overview of Bulk Reviewer and the background, and I'm really excited about future directions. But yeah, we do have several questions that I hope we have time for. The first one is, what is the best way to ensure that we're using the latest release of Bulk Reviewer?
Yeah, great question. So the easiest way is if you're in the application, maybe actually I can share my screen again really quickly just to show you. If you're in the application, if you go in the top bar here to Bulk Reviewer, the version number is in the menu. If you click this about Bulk Reviewer, it's just going to open up the GitHub page, but the version number is here. So you could verify that that's the same thing as the latest version in GitHub. So if we look at the GitHub repository, you can go to releases here, and it will show you, yeah, the latest release on September 10th is this Bulk Reviewer 0.3.0. This is where also the download files are. The DMG is the installer for Mac, and the app image is basically a packaged application that should work on a bunch of different Linux distributions. And you can look at some of the older issues here, as well as like what bugs and new features were added and all of that as well.
Okay, and our next question is, curious to hear about any issues or nuances you've had with file rating a wide array of file types, encodings, etc. at scale. Does Bulk Extractor handle this entirely for all supported files?
It's a really good question, right? I think probably the answer to that is in reality, no, but it does a very good job. Like one of the reasons that I wanted to use Bulk Extractor as the engine instead of kind of building something new to do that is because it is pretty battle tested. It's used in a lot of different environments, including high stakes kind of legal environments. And it's had a lot of development work on it, a lot of bugs resolved. And if you look through the code, there's a lot of code in there, for example, handling character encodings and stuff that would probably take like years to recreate. The level of sophistication for in a new code base. So it's not going to get everything, but it is pretty good. I will say, like across. I've tested it with files from a number of different file systems and operating systems, with a number of different encoding, like file encodings and character encodings rather. And it picks up 90 some percent of it. But I think the question here is really getting to an interesting question about confidence. Like this is part of what makes this issue of private and sensitive information so difficult, is that like the stakes are quite high. So in order for us to use an automated approach to the problem, we have to have nearly 100% confidence that we're not going to dox somebody, or we're not going to contribute to some kind of real world harm by releasing files. And that's a really hard thing to have. So I'm doing a research project right now with Jess White from the University of Toronto Libraries, where we're interviewing Canadian librarians, archivists, and kind of museum professionals about their workflows around this and the kind of questions and obstacles they have. And we'll be publishing a paper probably in the next year or so with some of those findings. But this issue of confidence comes up a lot, especially talking about like machine learning type approaches or AI type approaches, which is something I didn't really talk about yet, but is something that is also very much on my mind, is like one potential avenue for future improvement on this issue. But the thing is, even the definition of what's private or sensitive is so contextual. It depends on the context of the collection, on your institutional context, on what it is that the donor considers private, what third parties who might be named in files, what kind of legal obligations they have, or what their feelings on the matter. So I think, I don't know that we're ever going to get to a point where you just train a model and then the model goes and finds everything and we have 100% confidence. I think what we should be aiming for is like advocating for the human labor and tools that assist us in making these kind of judgment calls. And as the tools get better and better, they can help us more and more. But I doubt very much personally that they'll move from triage tools to like solutions.
Well, that somewhat relates to our next question, actually, which is, can one use Bulk Reviewer to search for a specific text? For instance, if we wanted to review a digital collection for racist language or terms, would Bulk Reviewer be a good tool for identifying such words, sentences? I'm assuming we would need to identify a list of terms to search for, but just curious if this can be used for text in addition to numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. So like that regular expressions example that I gave where I put in artifactual and concordia, you could do something similar to that with a list of basically racist terminology and have it search for those. And because it uses regular expressions, you can do things like, just kind of putting the root of the word and then having it search for all endings. That's also very similar, I think, to what EPAD does with its lexicons. So I think a more sophisticated version of this over time would probably use more proper natural language processing techniques and less like specific regular expression pattern matching, which is what it's doing now. But you could, if you have the terminology that you want to look for, you can feed that and do that today.
And I know there are people on this call that maybe have yet to use Bulk Extractor and Bulk Reviewer. And we did get a question about, could you please give an overview of the difference between the two tools and how they interact? So maybe you can speak more to those differences.
Yeah, totally. So Bulk Extractor is an open source tool. It's actually public domain because it was developed by Simpson Garfinkel as an employee of the US government. I believe when he was working at the Census Bureau, maybe, or no, maybe he's, anyway, it doesn't matter. He was a US government employee, so it's public domain code. And basically, Bulk Extractor is a program written in C++ that most people interact with through the command line that actually does the sort of pattern matching searches and returns that directory of feature files, each of which. Oh, Diane, thank you. Yeah, he was at the Naval Postgraduate School. That's right, at the time. I think he might be at the Census Bureau now. But so Bulk Extractor is the program that's actually doing the searches, and what it returns is basically a directory of text files that have these features and some information. They're like tab separated text files. It'll be like the feature, the context it's in, the path to it. There is a GUI, a graphical interface for Bulk Extractor that I think is maybe getting dropped for the 2.0 release. But it is very much aimed at like an investigator's use case. So again, it's really aimed at like finding whether there are instances of these things that we're looking for in a source, not so much then taking action on it. So Bulk Reviewer is the application that I wrote basically to provide almost like an actionable layer on top of this open source engine for finding the PII. So doing things like being able to kind of make annotations, dismiss things as false positives, do file exports and reporting, all of that kind of stuff. You can run Bulk Extractor without Bulk Reviewer. in fact, if you haven't used it, I would encourage you to. It's just also kind of interesting. But Bulk Reviewer's aim is to sort of package it all together for you, so that you as an archivist don't really need to know how it's working under the hood, and it will just like kind of find the stuff and present it in an environment where you can then take action and assess the results.
Thank you for that elaboration. I'm sure folks will need to get going in the next few minutes, but those were all the questions we received through the form. We have just a few more minutes in case anyone wants to drop something in the chat or the forum. But in the meantime, I do have a question, and we discussed this before the webinar, Tessa, but I just thought I'd share my question in case other folks out there have encountered similar issues. So I was trying to load existing bulk extractor reports, and the size of my reports in total was about 500 megabytes. So pretty heavy, and it wasn't able to load. So I will be sharing the error messages with you, Tessa, later, but maybe you could just express your thoughts on why someone might encounter that sort of issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the short answer is I'm not sure. I doubt it has to do with the size so much as it's possible that there was something with one of the files where Bulk Reviewer wasn't able to process them. It could have been a character encoding thing. It could have been, not really sure. But I would like to use this opportunity to say basically what people should do if you do run into an issue. You can email me, and that's helpful. But the absolute best thing you can do when you have an issue is to go to the GitHub repository, github.com/bulkreviewer/bulkreviewer, and go to issues here, and actually file an issue. So this is the best way to do a bug report. If you give it a quick title, like 500 megabytes of bulk extractor features won't load. And then you could like give a little bit of explanation. And if there's an error message in the application that you're seeing, copy and paste it into here. And that way, like, it helps me keep track of these things and also which ones have been fixed and which fixes are included in releases. And the more information that you can give, basically the better.
Well, thank you, Tessa. I will be talking to you over GitHub then. And I
For
think
sure, I look forward to it.
And I think that's all the time we have for today. So I wanted to thank you again and encourage everyone to join the privacy and confidentiality section in thanking Tessa Walsh for this really thorough and great overview of Bulk Reviewer. And one of the other question posters said they would be reaching out to you about development help. So
fantastic, that's great. Yeah, I reach out for any reason, but especially if you want to work together, that would be great.
And we will be posting a recording of this, I believe, on the SAA YouTube channel. So we'll be sending that out as well. Thank you, Tessa, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you for coming, everyone.